and cameras off. Please keep your mic and cameras off to save on bandwidth. If you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A in the bottom of your screen. And please introduce yourselves in the chat box. You can keep any general chat, any comments in the chat box, and any questions that you have that you would like to bring to any of our presenters, please put it in our Q&A. Next slide, Ben, please. We want to thank members of the IFE core group and the webinar working group for supporting this presentation today. And to all of our presenters as well. Next slide, please. So our objectives for today are to launch the infographic on preventing and managing inappropriate donations. This was led by Linda and Isabel, who present today, and it was within consultation for the IFE core group. We want to introduce the new UNICEF BMS procurement guidance, and we have some very interesting country experiences to share with you today on preventing and managing inappropriate donations. So it's a much needed webinar. We're very thankful to everyone who has supported it, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today is the introduction now, the launch of the infographic. Please open or go to Mentimeter in your browser. We'll have an audience question. We'll have 2 audience questions today through Mentimeter. We'll share your responses. After that, we'll have Mara present the UNICEF BMS procurement guidance, and we'll have case studies from Latin America and the Caribbean, Cambodia, Slovenia, Myanmar, and Timor-Leste. We'll have a second Mentimeter question and with your participation, a Q&A, and closing. Next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. I'm Brooke Bauer. I'm the IYCFE and Gender Advisor for the GNC Technical Alliance Technical Support Team. Isabel Madigo, she's the consultant emergency nutrition. She's a consultant with ENN, and she's the global IYCFE advisor with Save the Children. Fatmata Sise, she's a nutrition specialist in infant feeding with UNICEF HQ. We'll have a recorded presentation from Her Excellency, Dr. Prak Sofenri from Cambodia, Ministry of Health, the Undersecretary of State. Sanjay Kumar Das, he's the nutrition manager and the interim nutrition cluster coordinator, is with UNICEF Myanmar. Dr. Marco Sorana, he's with IBFAN, and as is Dr. Clavel Sanchez, is also with IBFAN and will present that presentation. Dr. Magdalena Woolry, she'll present for Timor-Leste. She's a maternal and child health, infant and young child feeding consultant. Anna Kristovic, she's the program manager with ADRA Slovenia. And Linda Shecker-Bebery, she's the IFE core group facilitator and the consultant for the Emergency Nutrition Network for ENN. Next slide, please, Ben. And thank you to Ben and Sanja for the support on the slides and the movements today. We'll have Linda and Isabel begin their presentation on the launch of the infographic, which we're all very excited about. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. So we are so excited to finally be able to share with you this infographic on preventing and managing harmful donations during emergencies. So this infographic was developed by Linda and myself in collaboration with a brilliant team of designers and a small working group of IFE core group members. So this development started after this topic was really identified as an urgent issue for which detailed global guidance is lacking. And it's really not uncommon for the IFE core group to receive questions such as, what on earth should I do with these 20 tons of infant formula that have just arrived at the airport in the middle of an emergency? So we hope that this infographic will start to answer some of these questions for you. So for today's presentation, Linda and I will spend some time walking you through the infographic. I'll cover the first part, and then Linda will cover prevention, detection, and management. So let's take a closer look. The key message here is really to never solicit, donate, accept or distribute donations of breast milk substitutes and other prohibited products in an emergency. And the infographic really seeks to unpack this message and to give you some practical tips on how to go about this so that we can keep infants and young children safe from harm during emergencies. But besides breast milk substitutes, what are these prohibited products? Let's take a look. So the first one on the list is BMS, breast milk substitutes. Follow-on formula, growing up milks, toddler milks, they are never needed. Despite what the clever marketing of the BMS manufacturers would have us believe, these products are unnecessary in all circumstances. And there's actually a high risk in an emergency that they could accidentally be given to younger infants, which can be dangerous. Infant formula is a little different. It should never be donated or included in a blanket distribution. But of course, it can be procured and provided in a controlled manner for infants who really need it. And Fatmata will tell us more about this later on in the presentation. But here we are really talking about donations and blanket distributions for which it is absolutely not allowed. In terms of other milk products, so although in many parts of the world, milk products are viewed as an important part of young children's diets, in emergencies, it's still not recommended to distribute them. And this is mainly because there is a very high risk that these milk products will be used as a breast milk replacement at times when mothers are worried about the quality or quantity of their breast milk. And there are also some food handling and safety concerns, including the preparation of milk powder with unsafe water, for example. And so therefore, the operational guidance on infant feeding in emergencies states that dried milk products and liquid milk should not be distributed as a single commodity in general or blanket distributions. Next up, we have baby teas, juices, and waters that are marketed for infants under 6 months. This is a clear violation of the WHO International Code, and these products place infants at risk, particularly during emergencies. Bottles, teats, and breast pumps are incredibly difficult to use hygienically in emergency settings, thereby increasing the risk of diarrheal disease and other infections. And lastly, commercial complementary foods, which are marketed for infants under 6 months, are also a code violation and not permitted. And yet, despite all this guidance, and despite knowing the risks, we see that these types of donations and uncontrolled distributions happen time and time again. So here we can see a few concerning examples from around the world. There's India, the UK, Syria, Yemen, Honduras, and in the middle is my neighboring island from where I live in Thailand, where Nestle donated 1 ton of powdered milk for children aged 1 and over, and this was distributed to Myanmar migrant worker camps during the pandemic. So looking at these pictures, you might already start to get an idea of why these types of donations are problematic. It doesn't look like any one-to-one individual assessment of need is going on. Additional supplies that are required to hygienically prepare and store these supplies are not being provided. Let's take a closer look at what exactly the problem is. very often donated products are in violation of the code. As you know, the code is in place to protect infants and young children and their caregivers against the aggressive and unethical marketing practices. And unfortunately, donations themselves are often an unethical marketing practice, as suppliers use the misfortune of others to enter into new markets, portraying themselves as doing good, and then moving in with an expensive product once a mother's breast milk has dried up. They are often unsafe. Sometimes these products are expired or nearing expiry. So sadly, in this case, the donation is actually a dumping exercise. They are often the wrong type or of unreliable quality. So personally, I have seen all sorts of specialized formulas being distributed, or even formula taken out of the tin and scooped and placed in small plastic bags, which very quickly gets moldy and is incredibly dangerous. They are often provided in excessive quantity, where there is really a vast overestimation of how much formula is really needed. And so there's then an extremely high risk of overspill of these products. Often they're donated in the wrong language, which means that a mother might come across a product that she's never seen before, not know how to correctly prepare it, placing her baby at high risk of illness and malnutrition. It's usually near impossible to hygienically use these products in an emergency context. So this might be because there's a lack of safe water, there's not a clean and dry storage space, there's not a heat source to boil the water, just to name a few examples. And unfortunately, what we see is that these products are very often used by breastfeeding mothers. And the more that a baby receives a breast milk substitute, the less that they breastfeed. And in turn, this means that their mother will gradually start making less milk for their baby. But these donations are also harmful for non-breastfed infants who need a breast milk substitute. So these kinds of donations are often also made with good intentions by people who are worried about the plight of these babies, the stories that we see in the media, on the news, and they want to help. So it is very important for these well-wishers to understand that non-breastfed infants need far more than just infant formula to survive and to thrive. They need a comprehensive package of support. This includes storage and preparation equipment, feeding equipment in the form of feeding cups, a heat source, safe water, counseling, education, access to health services, and a sustainable supply of a breast milk substitute. And a tin of formula handed off the back of a truck does not meet these requirements. So in conclusion, such donations directly decrease breastfeeding, they increase formula feeding, and subsequently malnutrition, illness, and death. So here we can see an example from Sri Lanka. Linda, you can just pop back to the previous one, please, with the photos. And if we take a look at these photos, really shockingly, you can see that a lot of the mothers actually have their baby at their breast while they are receiving these products. And somehow we are telling these mothers that we don't believe in their ability to breastfeed their baby. And this can really, really undermine their confidence. So instead, what these mothers should be receiving is skilled breastfeeding support and encouragement as we celebrate their incredible ability to nourish and to comfort and to protect their babies from the worst of an emergency's conditions. But unfortunately, we know that mothers are very likely to use donations of BMS, even if they are breastfeeding at the time. So let's now take a look at the harm that results from this. So after the 2006 earthquake in Indonesia, about 75 to 80% of households who had a baby in the household received donations of breast milk substitutes, despite the fact that very few of these babies were artificially fed before the emergency started. And sadly, we saw that the rates of diarrhea in infants in the households that received donations more than doubled as a result, as the mothers who would normally breastfeed their babies introduced these products. So what can we do to prevent these dangerous donations from occurring? Over to you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you so much. Yes, so now that Isabel has highlighted really the importance, or more or less the why, related to the donations, I will move ahead with the second part of the infographic, and which basically looks at the what. So it provides the guidance on actually what can we do to prevent those donations and prevent this harm. And if we weren't able to prevent it, what can we do to detect it and manage it? So the first bit of that part looks at the role. You know, each one of us has a role wherever we are working in humanitarian settings, in whichever sector or in whichever role. We have a responsibility to stop and prevent these donations. So you can see at the top here, the first bit is really never to call for donations of these products, right? So this is the first main message. Whichever role you play, you should never call for these donations. The second main message is be aware of the relevant policies, the code, the legislations. And the third message is really to report any calls, offers, or actual donations, including online media. We're seeing this so much in the context of COVID, to report this to the designated authority. And then the infographic zooms in on the different roles, one of which, for example, the government, health and nutrition cluster coordinators and partners. And of course, gives examples of actions in order to prevent those donations. One of the most important, of course, is to have a policy that clearly states that donations should not be accepted. Another is to ensure that there is an alert and monitoring system, that there is a prevention and management task force, a group who is able to actually monitor these donations. Other sectors that are also included in this infographic, of course, is food security. And this is where we need to ensure that the rations include safe and appropriate complementary food, and that they are compliant with the WHO code. Then we move to customs, and we often forget those. It's very important, of course, to have in place customs and importation control measures to implement the policy that is related to the code and the operational guidance, and to keep clear records and communicate regularly on any confiscated relief items. Another role, of course, is for donors, and we often see governments of developed countries who provide donations of infant formula. And so it's really important for donors to actually fund life-saving services. And Isabel has mentioned nutrition counseling, breastfeeding support and counseling, nutritious food for the mother. Next, we have, of course, child protection and social welfare sector. Here as well, we need a reminder to never include the BMS in the standard family kit, and to coordinate with nutrition sector to secure appropriate infant feeding support for separated and orphaned children. And then next we have the army, the logistics and camp management, again, to adopt policy and to reject requests for procurement, storage, transportation, and distribution of these restricted products. And then finally, the media, whom we often also forget, never to call for donations in media and disseminate information that encourages helpful aid. And here I want to just give a reminder of the guide that we have on the IFE core group for the media on how to write and talk about infant and young child feeding in emergencies in the media. So this is in terms of preventing donations. These are the suggested, of course, actions based on the operational guidance. Now, in the event of the unprevented donations, how can we detect and manage these unprevented donations? And again, the infographic provides the suggestions and emphasizing that donations can arrive very early in emergencies, and we've seen that. And therefore, preparedness is really critical, and it saves money and time and lives. How many times have we seen donations arrive and having to pay resources in order to be able to manage these donations? Therefore, 3 steps suggested in terms of detecting and managing. The first of which is the crucial, which is detecting and reporting. So we spoke in the prevention about the violation and donation system, and this one needs to be in place in order to be able to detect and report these donations. Very important to sensitize stakeholders on the why and the how to report, and then of course, communicate or share the incoming alerts, and then activating a donation management and prevention task force. The second step, of course, is to intercept, transport, and securely store. So if we identify a donation, need to activate the task force to actually handle these alerts and to have a designated agency to rapidly intercept these products. And then, of course, implement security measures to ensure that these products are not stolen or reused in an inappropriate way. And then the third step is to sort and handle. And as you can see, we have suggested a donation management plan to guide a decision-making process on what to do with the intercepted products. And of course, it's important to be prepared for something like that and to have that plan ready. Secure resources to implement the plan. Again, we talk about resources, therefore the importance of preventing this and being prepared to prevent this, and to handle this donation according to a donation management plan. And this is the famous donation management plan, which has, to be honest, in the development of this infographic has had different shapes, let's say, and eventually this is what it looks like. So this is a suggestion of a donation management plan where you can start with a thinking process around, number one, if you've identified the donation, the first question to ask is whether it can be returned. And this is sort of the first resort, is to return the donation. However, if it cannot be returned, then this management plan provides suggestions in terms and asking questions whether the product is suitable for reuse, if it is adequate complementary food, if it is a BMS, whether it is suitable for use, and if yes, can the intervention be justified and funded? Because we have to realize that this is something that will require resources. And Fatmata will talk about the BMS procurement. And then lastly, last result, options for reuse. Of course, this plan could be contextualized, modified. This is, again, a suggestion. And then a reminder here, of course, if the answers are no to all of these questions, the final decision would be to dispose, and then the importance of keeping the public informed to prevent any uninformed sensationalization of this destruction. So this is overall the content, very briefly, of the infographic. We're really now in use, and we encourage you, of course, to use it. I've put in the link to that in the chat box. I think I will move to the first activity to actually ask you your first impression on this infographic. So please, if you can, go to menti.com and answer this question in relation to your initial impression to this infographic. And also, how will you use this infographic? Where will you use it? What will you do with it? It would be great if you can spend a few minutes. So I will read through as you provide your contributions. The first of which is as a technical reference material that will support practitioners in the field to determine how to manage BMS appropriately. Wonderful. A training tool. This is really interesting. Training of health professionals and sharing with other health professionals. Would be nice to use an infographic like this on social media, but seems quite busy to share on social media. Right. That's the suggestion of doing some animation to it. You will share it with camp management. Super, tons of information, feels a bit overwhelming. We'll share it with practitioners at the country level. Right. Infographic is comprehensive, quite busy, not sure if we'll be able to print it out on A4. Text would be too small, indeed. Advocating for management of BMS donation and training staff. As a reminder for key aspects to BMS management, increasing material. Oops. Visually appealing, easy to follow, we'll share in our organization alongside our policy on management of milk products. Quick reference guide, wonderful. Awareness raising in donor countries. Brooke, how are we doing on time? Shall I move or we're okay? All right, great. Sensitizing disaster response staff, exactly. So to be able to disseminate beyond the nutrition community. Visually appealing, easy to follow. We will share in our organization alongside our policy on management. I have to read quicker. Awareness raising in donor countries. Great. Quick reference guide. Great. So in general, we hope that I will move to my other, oops, all right. So in general, positive feedback, and hopefully we'll be able to use that tool. Ben, can I ask you to please just share the last slide on the infographic, just to maybe give a few last pieces of information. Or maybe Brooke can do that. The next slide, please. The next slide, please. Sorry, I don't think it's moving on my side. Yeah, so maybe just lastly, I wanted to mention that at the moment, this infographic is available in French and Japanese. And please do contact us if you're interested in translating or contextualizing. Actually, feel free to adopt it and contextualize it to your context. Thank you. Over to you, Brooke. Looking forward to hearing the country experiences.
Great. Thanks, Linda and Isabel. Super interesting and a really important infographic. So we're all happy to see it. Linda, you went through the Mentimeter already, so we'll go to Fatmata now and her presentation of procurement for breast milk substitutes.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, wherever you're joining us from today. I am going to present the procurement and use of breast milk substitute in humanitarian settings, which was launched in 2021. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So colleagues, as you may know, in 2020, UNICEF launched its new nutrition strategy, and the strategy is committed to supporting mothers to exclusively breastfeed their infant to 6 months of age and to continue breastfeeding to age 2 and beyond with appropriate complementary feeding. And the protection, promotion, and support for breastfeeding is central to all our humanitarian programs that include infant and young child feeding support. But as you may also know, in every emergency, there will be infants who are not breastfed or who are partially breastfed. And these infants are highly vulnerable and require urgent and targeted protection and support given their increased risk of morbidity and mortality. So in 2018, UNICEF released a guidance which confirms that UNICEF can act as a provider of last resort for BMS. So this basically means that where there are no other partners in a position to procure BMS, UNICEF will do so. This is also in line with UNICEF's cluster lead agency accountabilities. In 2021, UNICEF updated this guidance and confirms that UNICEF can act as a provider of first resort in addition to being a provider of last resort. This means that even if other agencies are able to procure BMS where it is warranted as part of the humanitarian response, UNICEF can also provide BMS. So the document I will just briefly highlight today will outline UNICEF's commitment, the guiding principles, the procedures for managing the procurement and use of BMS, and also the implementation to some extent. But I want to caution here that this guidance is not intended to provide comprehensive programming guidance on infant feeding in emergencies, because there are other documents that will do so. Next slide, please. Are we on the next slide? Thank you. So the procurement guidance is also aligned with our policy commitment and global standards. This includes the operational guidance on infant and young child feeding in emergencies, the code on BMS, and the subsequent World Health Assembly resolutions and the sphere standards. As part of UNICEF's core commitment for children in humanitarian action, UNICEF has a key role to play in providing and supporting in preparedness and response efforts for infant and young child feeding. So as such, the procurement of breast milk substitutes for infants in need is aligned with our commitments. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in alignment with these guiding principles, we have established that the need for the provision of BMS must be identified by informed technical personnel. And UNICEF will continue to advocate and provide for the recommended IYCF practices in line with the CCs before, during, and after a humanitarian crisis. We will adhere to the principles of do no harm related to IYCF practices and proactively assess the need to support formula-dependent infants in humanitarian contexts. We will also advocate and enable individual assessment, targeted support and supervision and monitoring for infants who are not breastfed or who are partially breastfed, and also act to prevent and limit the risk of promotion and inappropriate use of BMS. We will also ensure that BMS is only distributed to infants for whom the need to use infant formula has been established by an individual assessment. Next slide, please.
Hey, Fatmana, if we could wrap it up within the next 30 seconds or so.
Yes, please. So for the accusation of BMS, I just want to highlight that UNICEF will not seek or accept donations of BMS, only where it has been determined that UNICEF can acquire BMS, and this product needs to be procured through normal procurement channels. And offices considering the procurement and distribution need to seek agreement from the UNICEF HQ, the nutrition section, the program section, and the supply division. So there is a lot of information in the guidance which would provide further information for countries. Next slide, please. And the guidance also contains general aspects of procurement, which will be useful for countries to familiarize with. This includes preparedness, communication, social mobilization, etc. So colleagues, to wrap it up, I would like to thank all those who contributed to the development of this guidance. I will post the link on the chat box. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Fatmata. Now we'll go into our country case studies, and we'll begin with Latin America and
in emergencies in Latin America and the Caribbean. Hello? I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. Okay, for this report presents, I'm sorry, I'm Marcos Arana from Mexico, IFAN Mexico. We'll make a presentation called the Challenges for Infant and Young Child Feeding in Emergencies in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next, please. The COVID-19 pandemic surprisingly emerged as an additional threat and has affected the health of women, especially when contracted or manifested the infection during pregnancy or after childbirth.
I'm sorry, Marcus. There seems to be something strange going on with the slides.
I'm sorry. It's. Can you? There's some. You are. I would like to. I wanted to share the screen. Can you please restart it without sound, please?
Sorry, Marcus. Did you? Can you hear me, Marcus?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello?
Which slide were you? Which slide are you on? So I can move it.
Yes. Can you please from the? Well, we can start now. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. For most people, disasters are of a great concern because they threaten the life and livelihood of individuals and entire populations. But from some others, all these disasters are an opportunity for business. In the case in the Lancet WHO UNICEF report, A Future for Children, published in 2020, states that the major global threats for children are climate change, pollution, violence, and the commercial pressure that encourage unhealthy lifestyles. These threats take a concrete form during emergency situations where the energy and resources that are needed to protect mothers and babies and fulfill their basic requirements sometimes need to be diverted to fight the wrong and ill-intentioned interventions. This is the case of unsolicited donations of breast milk substitutes. Next, please. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic surprised. The COVID-19 pandemic surprisingly emerged as an additional threat and has affected the health of women, especially when contracted or manifested during pregnancy or after childbirth. However, in some countries, it has been a cause of increased maternal mortality. Nevertheless, there is a growing evidence that breastfeeding should not be interrupted, since even in these circumstances, it is the best way to provide protection for babies. Next, please. Since the beginning of the pandemic, infant food companies, in flagrant violations of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, flooded the region with unsolicited donations and contributed to promote fear to breastfeed. IFAN undertook monitoring activities in various parts of Latin America and the Caribbean and found that these violations were not isolated cases, but manifestations of the deliberate strategy to take advantage of the pandemic to promote their products. In Mexico, Nestle teamed up with local Coca-Cola producers to promote donations of breast milk substitutes for indigenous communities in the states of Chiapas and Oaxaca. These were suspended only when IFAN promoted international reporting and denunciations. Next, please. Next slide, please. In other countries, like this case in Paraguay, the companies disseminated wrong information that caused fear among breastfeeding women, saying that they could transmit COVID-19 through breast milk. This is the case of Paraguay. This is a leaflet from Nutricia. Next, please. Next slide, please. In other countries like Honduras and other countries in Central America, Nestle and other companies donated cereals and breast milk substitutes aimed for the poor sectors of the population. Next, please. Next, please. Yes. Well, these donations of food, money, and medical equipment by infant food companies were repeated in different countries like Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic. We have to take in consideration that sometimes the COVID-19 pandemic also there were also some natural disasters in the same region, so these products were also used for humanitarian relief in these cases. Next, please. Next slide, please. This in South America, we had the same scenario in Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Peru, Uruguay, and Chile, where even big amounts of money were donated to governments, also causing problems of conflicts of interest. Next, please. In Mexico, and the COVID-19 pandemic was also aggravated by the presence of some other disasters created by earthquakes and hurricanes. And in all these cases, we had told all these problems of public appeals of donations of breast milk substitutes made by radio, by television, and by booklets and by newspapers, asking for donations of breast milk substitutes and feeding bottles. Next, please. Also, we have these donations of near to expire breast milk substitutes as unsolicited donations. This is the case of donations of thousands of tins donated by Mead Johnson. And many of these donations went to the Red Cross. Next, please.
Thank you, Dr. Marcos. If you can wrap it up within about 30 seconds or so.
Yes, we had all these problems. Also, well, also we have an international instrument like code in which we celebrate 40 years of its adoption. There is an urgent need to review existing regulations country by country in aim to ensure that provisions of the code and the operational guidelines of infant and young child feeding in emergencies they are part of the frame of protection for children and also part of the measures to adopt and promote resilience against climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's a really wide range of examples, and it's really important that that's shared. Thank you so much for that. Next, we have our presentation on Cambodia, and it's a recorded video. So.
Ministry of Health and Vice Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Prakspaniri, Under Secretary of State, Ministry of Health and Vice Chair of the Executive Working Group for Enforcement of Sub-Degree 133. On behalf of the Ministry of Health Cambodia, I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to present our experience in enforcement of Sub-Degree 133. Cambodia has made significant progress in improving maternal child health in the last 15 years. The under-5 mortality rate dropped from 124 per 1,000 live birth in 2000 to 35 per 1,000 live birth in 2014. Maternal mortality also decreased 1,000 live birth to 170 per one over the same time frame. Nationally, child stunting declined from 50% in 2000 to 32% in 2014, which is still high. In terms of COVID-19, Cambodia took early and decisive measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19, currently with 102,827 recovery and 2,319 deaths. For Ratanakiri is a remote province in the northeast of Cambodia with a stunting rate of 40%, where 66% of households cannot afford a nutritious diet. So far, 2,023 people have been infected with COVID-19 in the province. Breastfeeding promotion has been one of the most significant public health success stories in Cambodia. Rate of exclusive breastfeeding and early initiation of breastfeeding increased significantly from 2000 to 2010. Unfortunately, in 2014, national data found that exclusive breastfeeding decreased. And at the same time, bottle feeding and use of the breast milk substitute increased. In 2005, the government of Cambodia adopted the sub-degree on the marketing of products for infant and young child feeding, called Sub-Degree 133. The sub-degree includes many provisions of the WHO International Code and restricts the promotion of breast milk substitute for children up to 2 years of age, label and packaging, donations, and more. The executive working group is comprised of the members from 4 ministries and oversee the monitoring and enforcement of sub-degree. This include reviewing and taking action on violation reports submitted by the ministry and the public. Although there are challenges, Cambodia has made a great effort to enforcement of sub-degree 133. In recent years, strong action has been taken against violators. 40 warning letters were sent to manufacturer or distributor in violation of sub-degree 133. In addition, monetary penalties were imposed to 28 violators, ranging from 2.5 million riel to 5 million riel, around $625 to $1,250. Now, I would like to share our experience on recent breast milk substitute donation. The Ministry of Health received a request to approve a donation of nearly 80,000 cans of breast milk substitute that would be distributed to vulnerable baby and young children in Ratanakiri province. This donation was offered by a foreign company through an NGO working in the province. However, Sub-Decree 133 prohibits breast milk substitute donation in several articles. After receiving the request, a Ministry of Health committee verified the prohibition list in Sub-Decree 133. The committee agreed that the regulation prohibits donations under Articles 13, 14, and 15. Additionally, our national infant and young child feeding policy endorses exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months and continue breastfeeding until 24 months and beyond. Therefore, the breast milk substitute donation was not aligned with national policy and could not be accepted. After that, His Excellency Professor Minister of Health issued a response letter with a decision not to accept the donation. 17 development partners, including WHO, UNICEF, World Food Programme, FAO, Helen Keller International, and others, sent an appreciation letter to the Ministry of Health expressing their support for the decision. We have learned that in order to protect and support breastfeeding effectively, there must be strong national regulation on breast milk substitute, along with an equality strong mechanism to enforce these regulations. Having government champions, especially at the high level, is critical to drive effective enforcement. Cambodia has also learned that clear and active monitoring and reporting, integrated into routine system, are key for enforcement to be effective. Finally, continued technical and financial support from development partners is very important to strengthening the enforcement of Sub-Decree 133 in Cambodia. My presentation is complete. Again, I would like to thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak. And I also wish you all a productive meeting. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to Cambodia for that presentation. Our next presentation will be from Slovenia. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much for the word, Brooke, and hello to everyone. So I will present a little bit more unique and special case that represents the European refugee crisis from September 2015 till March 2016. Can you go to the next slide, please? It was an unprecedented and very large emergency in a very small country that was completely unprepared for it. And during this time, more than 360,000 refugees crossed the country in hopes of reaching Northern Europe. And at some point, there were more than 12,000 in one day. The population was mostly male. However, as the emergency progressed, women represented around 25% of the population. Next slide, please. So in the following slides, for a better understanding, I will show you the progression of the crisis and somehow how it progressed from chaos to somehow managed and organized crisis. So the first stage of the emergencies, there were no facility, infant feeding was not taken into account, and refugees stayed in the country between 24 to 48 hours. Next slide, please. So in the second stage, there were still no facilities. The camp was on the train station. There was already attention on lactating women and infant children, but this was also the stage where beneficiaries were most dependent on BMS, and they stayed in the country only for a few hours, up to maximum 24 hours. Next slide, please. So in the last stage, there were facilities established to provide care for lactating mothers, but still refugees stayed in the country only for a few hours to cure or 72 hours, depending on border closures. Next slide, please. So the context was that the prevalent form of infant feeding remained breastfeeding. However, there were cases of feeding with breast milk substitutes. There was no policy. Basically, the emergency was ad hoc adapting to the situation. Nutrition from the camp management was based on natural disaster setting in Slovenia from previous years. Only calorie value and halal standards were taken into account. There was no policy that would address infant feeding. Nobody established to deal with donations of BMS, milk products, bottles, or teeth, and the issues were addressed on coordination meetings. However, the progress was limited and slow. Next slide, please. There were many challenges that women faced with breastfeeding. The situation was very chaotic, as I already said. Main problems were shortages of food, overcrowded centers. So the center that can accept 500 people, there were more than 1,500 people in it. People were standing in lines for 4 to 6 hours, not allowed to move. Health status of mothers was questionable. There were no facility. There was cultural practices that prevented women to breastfeed in large crowds. And there was lack of counseling for mothers in transition. Next slide, please. So here we come to the problem, or let's say violation. As mentioned previously, BMS was used for specific cases related to the challenges mentioned before. It was present since stage 1 of the emergency, and it was provided from several actors on the field, including the coordinating and managing entity, which was the civil protection. So at the second stage, Adra Slovenia was offered a donation of 15 boxes of baby bottles, as well as 360 pieces of baby bottles. And despite network SOPs, the donation was accepted on the field. It was accepted due to the need for safe and proper use of infant formula, which was anyways used, but it was used in used bottles that refugees were carrying with them from other countries. And even in some other forms, it was basically provided very unhygienically. And yeah, I think that explains a lot. So next slide, please. So how did we actually solve this donation? So donation was reported to our headquarters, so to ADRA International and the network, as well as on coordination meetings with other actors on the field, whilst at the same time, we were educating volunteers on best practices of encouragement of breastfeeding. We allocated more funds for additional food ratios for mothers and children above 6 months. So upon informing the donor, which was ADRA International, on the issues of infant feeding, remaining funds for the intervention were restructured to ensure purchase of additional food ratios for mothers and vulnerable beneficiaries. And at that stage, food shortages were already resolved. Also, we asked the donors of in-kind donations to donate foods that are nutritious and can act as additional ratios for mothers who are breastfeeding. So the donation of baby bottles was still used in specific cases due to the reasons I already explained, but mostly because of lack of breast milk, cultural reasons, or upon doctor's recommendation. Next slide, please. On the higher level, ADRA was advocating for safe space for breastfeeding and coordination meeting, advocating for provision of additional foods for pregnant and lactating women, and the result was lower distribution of infant formula. There was, due to the pressure from all actors on the field, new transitional camp was established where there was space for child-friendly space, separate Vaha container for breastfeeding, changing, and rest, as well as special medical tent, which ADRA supported within the camp, with informing and accompanying lactating women to child-friendly space and Vaha container or medical tent, since they could not move freely around the camp at all. So with the establishment of Baja container and provision of a pediatrician, ADRA just continued to monitor and report donations within the camp. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Anna. We have about 30 seconds left, please.
Yeah, thank you. So if I finish with our lessons learned, so more efforts need to be dedicated to needs of pregnant and lactating women from the start, even if there are other more crucial needs. Joint efforts from all actors were crucial so that the facilities were provided at some point of the emergency. So progress was made on nutrition of infants and pregnant and lactating women. And educating volunteers and sensitizing actors was also a huge step to improve breastfeeding practices, but mainly the biggest lesson learned or added value, I'd say, was the debrief with the civil protection, where they finally recognized the need that they need to include this in their management of emergencies. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And very quickly moving on to Myanmar. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues from wherever you are joining in today's session. My name is Sanjay Kumar Das. I work with UNICEF Myanmar Nutrition Manager, and in the meantime, I'm also an interim nutrition cluster coordinator. Next slide, please. I will share the experience of Myanmar on controlling the BMS violation. So brief information on Myanmar. So total population of Myanmar is around 54 millions, and we are having the triple burden of malnutrition currently in Myanmar. In one side, high prevalence of undernutrition like stunting around 29%, wasting 7%. In some of the conflict affected areas, the wasting is up to 14%. While prevalence of anemia among children and women is more than 57%. On the other side, we are also observing the increasing trend of overweight and obesity, especially in women of reproductive age. It is around 25%, and in under 5 children, though it is 1%, but it indicates the increasing trend. In Myanmar, we are having the protracted crisis, both natural and man-made. So there is a problem of armed conflict in some of the areas for a long time. At the same time, there is a flood, cyclones, landslides on seasonal basis. You may be aware, since 1st February 2021, there was a political incident in Myanmar, and conflict is ongoing among different armed groups. At the same time, almost most of the government health workers are in civil disobedience movement. So most of the civil services, including basic health and nutrition services, have been interrupted in most of the areas. Due to the 1st February political incident, United Nations country team and other partners have decided to have limited engagement with the current de facto authorities. Next slide, please. Next slide. Regarding the IWCF related policy and current practice, so Myanmar is one of the countries promoting breastfeeding and hospital initiatives. At the same time, we were having the IWCF strategy for the period of 2011 to 2016. And currently we have developed maternal, infant and child nutrition strategy, and also an implementation plan for the period of 2021 to 2025. It was endorsed by MOHS before the political incident, that is in January 2021. There's also the breast milk substitute orders, which was launched in Myanmar in 2014, and its enforcement has been affected currently due to 1st February political crisis and civil disobedience movement. Regarding the IWCF practice, though the exclusive breastfeeding and continued breastfeeding at 24 months, which is a little bit better. Exclusive breastfeeding is 51%, and continued breastfeeding at 24 months is 64%. But still, other complementary feeding related practices like minimum dietary diversity, minimum acceptable diet is only 25% and 16% respectively. So it indicates the poor situation of IVF practice also in the Myanmar. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. So here we are going to share the experience of recent donation of infant formula. So in Myanmar, we're having the BMS violation monitoring and reporting system through the Sun, mainly the Sun CSA networks, who have the presence in wide presence in different areas of Myanmar, even in the remote part of the countries. They are monitoring and reporting on periodic basis to the nutrition cluster. Before 1st February political incident, nutrition cluster were compiling all these violations and sharing with the Ministry of Health and Sports for the necessary action. But currently, as we have the limited engagement with the government counterparts, so we got the report of violation and we discussed internally. This was a violation related to the distribution of infant formula in a remote part of the countries, and there was also advertisement in the Facebook social media for the donation of infant formula. So this was the problem we came to our attention. And next slide, please. Yeah, so we got this report on 31st August 2021 regarding the violation of BMS code. Then as we are not having engagement with the government counterpart at this moment, so we discussed internally within the non-government stakeholders like Sun CSA, Sun UN networks, and the nutrition clusters, and we identified mainly 3 action points. First, to reach out to those partners who are distributing infant formulas and convince them to stop the distribution. Then second, to do the community sensitization through the social media and release the joint statement. So we reached out to the partners who were distributing infant formula. It was actually not registered organization. They were informal youth groups, and they were doing the distribution. So when we reached out to them, it was very difficult to convince them because they were so much frustrated, and they were doing this with the good intention, because since 1st February, there were no any humanitarian assistance going on in those remote areas. So they were trying to do for the sake of children. But later on, when we convinced them and briefed them on the BMS code, then they agreed, and UNICEF and Save the Children also supported those community with the nutrition program as per the national guidelines and protocols. So on 2nd September, we succeeded to stop distribution. At the same time, we released the joint statement from the nutrition cluster on 22nd September and launched a live video Facebook session on 24th September to do the community sensitization. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Sanjay, we have about 30 seconds left for the presentation. Thank you.
Next slide. So for the action point, we released the joint statement with the name of Nutrition Partners Caution Against Unnecessary Use of BMS Code. Around 30,000 people viewed and 257 shared that. In the same way, we also did a live session on Facebook in the name of Human Milk is the Best for Human Babies, and it is timeless. WFP did the moderation, and UNICEF and Save the Children representatives were the panel members for this live session. And then we disseminated through UNICEF Facebook, Sun CSA Facebook, and Sun UN Network Facebooks to reach more people. Next slide, please. Regarding our lesson learned and challenges, so as we are having de facto authorities, next slide, and limited engagement with the government counterparts, so it is very difficult to take the necessary action, enforce the BMS code. But still, we realize that if we have the strong coordination mechanism, networking with non-government stakeholders, then we will be able to monitor and control the violation of BMS code. Our next step is also we are trying to reach out to the regional networks and take their support and guidance to control such kinds of violation in Myanmar in current challenging situation when we have a limited engagement with the government authorities. Thank you for your attention. Over.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for that wonderful example. Next, we have Timor-Leste. Thanks very much. Magdalena, are you on the? Can we switch possibly? Magdalena might have.
No, she's muted. Yep.
Magdalena, can you hear us? Perhaps she's having some connection issues. Ben and Linda and Fatmata, can we transfer to the Menti, the next Menti, and then hopefully we'll get Magdalena back on.
Sure, great, colleagues. Please type your response to the Mentimeter question, which is how did you present or manage donations? We would like to hear your experiences. So one here I can see on the screen is advocacy, great, education, training, wonderful. We did not accept the donations. That's great, excellent. So please keep your responses coming in. So far on the screen, we have 4, which are advocacy, education, training, and not accepting the donations. Great, stopping them and storing them, excellent. A lot of advocacy and repeated dissemination and internal policy, which is also great. The sensitization on dangers of donations to all relevant stakeholders, that's super. And then utilizing policies to prevent and manage donations, excellent. Then engaging the National Department of Health to issue a media statement advising against donations. That's wonderful.
Great, thank you very much.
Are we up on time?
I think so. I think we have Magdalena back with us now.
Oh, okay, that's great.
Really interesting how everybody's responded in their own context. Okay, Magdalena, over to you with Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Magdalena Woolery, and I would love to share Timor-Leste's example of how we supported a Lola Foundation for nurturing care centers of excellence. Next slide, please. slide. Yeah. One more. Okay. So Timor-Leste is situated between Australia and Indonesia, and it's an island nation. We experienced heavy rains, which resulted in flash floods, and it affected all of our municipalities. There were over 41 deaths and a total of over 30,000 households affected, mainly in the city of Dili. We experienced an influx of formula, bottles, milks, and other inappropriate products from Indonesia, and this was distributed in all the IDP camps. Next slide. So exclusive breastfeeding is 64.2%. Our under 5 mortality is high. 50% of our children are stunted. And according to UNICEF, 1 in 24 will not live to experience their 5th birthday. Carry on, sorry. One more picture. Yeah, so Timor-Leste has signed a lot of global policies. Within a decade, it signed the children's rights and so on, but the code has been on the desk for close to 2 decades now. And the breastfeeding promotion policy, which you can access online, is still in draft form. In 2020, Timor-Leste became what's called a sun country, and IPFAN have produced some great articles on this and the concerns regarding GAIN, the business entity of Sun. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, one more. So our experience, well, it has been a challenge, and but it's a good example for us because it's the whole reason we have a code. Industry has not changed. Their tactics remain the same, and they like to work through proxies. And well, since 2018, we've been documenting a pattern of behavior in undermining breastfeeding. And it culminated during this emergency, the flood emergency, in the refusal to release the standard IYCFE statement. But what was to follow was just shocking. Government agencies were distributing milk and other ultra-processed products to very malnourished women and children. I really want to share the case study of this child. He is 2 years old, and we found him in a camp. This camp had not yet received support. When we found him, he had diarrhea, vomiting, he was pyrexic, he had a fever, his MUAC was 11.2, and he was in a critical state. We provided nurturing care, and he started to thrive, and he was not the only one. There were other children. But it was shocking because we were working with Ministry of Health, and Maternal Child Health Department was 100% supporting our efforts and doing amazingly, but we received nasty phone calls. We were told to shut down. Next slide. Thank you. One more. Thanks. So the problem is really predatory marketing at every level. I'd never seen we like during the emergency. It just intensified. And because we do monitoring before the emergency, we could compare. And all the milk products from infant formula, follow-on formulas, maternal milks were discounted during an emergency. There was intense lobbying from a group in New South Wales, Australia. It's actually a registered business, and a major Indonesian bank had donated, you can see in the photo there, in just one monitoring in an IDP camp, 180 kilograms of infant formula. There's no water, there's no fuel. The evacuation centers all received Indo milk, from government agencies, including Ministry of Health Nutrition team. And you can see some of the monitoring collected there. There was high-level distributions of infant formula, other milk products, and ultra-processed food. What did this mean? It meant that children were living off instant noodles and Dan cow processed milk and Indo milk. A proxy at a proxy, I won't mention names, kept spreading the message that the WHO doesn't matter, WHO code doesn't matter. But Timor-Leste is a World Health Assembly member sovereign state and has endorsed the code. Next slide, please. So I just want to share with you some of the violations and some of the concerns and issues of conflicts of interest, potential conflicts of interest. So this one, the Red Cross distributed not only condensed milk, but they made social media and the head of the Red Cross Timor-Leste televised request for infant formula. This on the top left-hand corner, you'll see a Facebook post from a Red Cross volunteer asking for infant formula for twins. We did a rapid assessment there, and what I found was 0 mothers that were formula feeding. I found 10 mothers, 9 of them were exclusive breastfeeding. 1 of them had a 10-month-old that was breastfeeding and on complementary food. I received, and if you look, I don't know if you can zoom up on that white table, there is a bottle with a green lid and there's formula on there. So I received a call from the head of pediatrics at the National Hospital urging me to come and support this mother. And my heart sank when I saw her. It was this mother, and I have consent to share her story and photo. So her baby, one of her babies was query sepsis, was on oxygen, and we worked quickly to help this mother. But I just want to highlight 1 bottle of formula. We don't know how long it was left on that table. It's risky, and especially in emergency. Next to that picture, you'll see a packet of Indo milk. And if you look very carefully, there's some kind of infestation. We received a message from a mother support group who we trained in the code and so on. She says, ada ular. Ada ular means there's worms, so maggots in there. Next to that picture is the Minister of Health, who at that camp where we had found those worms, she came as a surprise visit and encouraged us to continue our work. But because we have monitors on the ground, we discovered that 5 days later, she returned privately, not with Ministry of Health, but privately to distribute Indo milk. Indo milk is from Indo Food, and Indo Food is co-chair of the Sun business. So anyway, next to that, you'll see our code monitoring tool. In May, on the anniversary of the code, the server was cut and it really hindered our monitoring. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Prime Minister's wife on the left and the President's wife. All this information is in the public domain. You can check out on their Facebook pages, so I can share. So this is the New South Wales group, Timor Chinese Association. Both the Prime Minister's wife and President's wife signed agreements, and these products were distributed in camps. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so how did we solve this? We had to be there on the ground. We provided nurturing care and developed centers of excellence. Nurturing care is a WHO framework, and it is amazing. It's evidence-based and it saves lives. Next slide, please. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so there's lots of lessons, but I won't go through all of it because of time. But number 1, target the most vulnerable. These are special needs babies. These are children. Identify the children that have diarrhea, that have respiratory tract infections, the malnourished, pregnant mothers, lactating mothers. Skin-to-skin contact is so important and it's underused. It prevents child trafficking. It's a psychosocial care for the mother and child, reduces depression and increases the mother's milk supply. Of course, we did breastfeeding protection, promotion and support, including developing a breastfeeding doll. We identified quickly wet nurses, developed a really simple database, did relactation and bottle amnesty and cup feeding. We did not need bottles. We did not need formula. There's mothers that have breast milk, and if they're counseled well, they will give their breast milk. The community empowerment is the number one. I mean, when the community is educated and understands the risks of formula, they hand over the bottles for the bottle amnesty and happily receive a cup. Our messaging is always simple. We have a lot of illiteracy, so we used images, and we developed 10 steps to centers of excellence, and MOH was so happy with the results because you could see it, the children, their MUAC readings, we had the data, they replicated 20 with UNICEF support. Alola were there, you know, and they prevented, intercepted and managed donations. We did not need to reuse ultra-processed products or formula. They cooked delicious, traditional nutritious foods, and we developed, because we get stockouts, and we worked with Pro Enema Restaurant School, who help women in the districts, empowers them, and we developed a local version of plum peanut. But really importantly, the community became co-heroes. They could see the results with their children. Next slide, please. Thank you, Ben. Next slide.
Thanks, Magdalena. That seems to be the last slide.
Oh, sorry, I did it. Wow. Okay. I kept to my 7 minutes. I did it. Wow.
You did great. Thanks. That's super interesting experience and really interesting presentation. Thank you so much for sharing it. We will go over now to Peggy with Q&A. I know that a few of you had asked some questions and they were answered within the chat box, but Peggy, is there anything else?
Yeah, hi. There were a couple of questions that came in that were answered, but I thought they deserved, I thought others might be interested in hearing the answers. So one came in that I'm going to throw to Isabel. It's, can you speak to how non-traditional BMS, that is dried milk powder, for example, was factored in when developing the tools in the infographic? There are times when either dried milk powder, in theory, not a BMS, is donated or provided, but some communities may use it as a BMS. So Isabel, could you take that one?
Sure, yes, and thank you for this question. So this infographic is based on the IFE core group's operational guidance on infant feeding and emergencies. And that guidance states that dried milk products and liquid milk should not be distributed as a single commodity in general or blanket distributions. And the reason that this is not recommended is exactly because of what you state. There is a high risk that although they're not intended for this use, these products can be used as a breast milk substitute, which places both breastfed and non-breastfed infants at risks. And there are also food handling and safety concerns. So the infographic provides some suggestions on how these products can be repurposed in a way that minimizes risk. However, having said that, these donations of milk powder can be extremely tricky to handle once they arrive. So prevention is the way to go. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Another really interesting question came in from Barbara, and I'd like perhaps Linda could take this one. Beyond the emphasis on how important breastfeeding, breast milk is for infants to survive and thrive, how can we prevent and discourage facilities in low and middle income countries that manage infants with birth defects? I'm specifically thinking of babies born with a cleft in the mouth, who often reach hospitals late when mothers can no longer produce breast milk or refuse to breastfeed. Could you take that one, Linda?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you. No, this is a really important question, as you say, and it really reminds us of the importance of having a policy in place, system in place, SOPs in place, even in non-emergencies related to infant and young child feeding that would ensure that each mother, first of all, is provided with counseling antenatally, and she's supported. She has all the counseling sessions, but also those infants who are in need of artificial feeding support to actually be provided with that in line with the code and in line with BMS management program that would be in place. And when we have this, when we have a BMS management program that is in place, or an artificial feeding support program, then this would actually ensure that these donations are prevented. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thanks so much. A number of other really great questions came in, but we are actually over time. So I think I need to send it back to Brooke.
Great, thank you. And if there are any questions, please feel free to email the GNC Technical Alliance. We'll make sure that any questions or concerns get answered and are passed along to the presenters, etc. Please take time. It's really important. We want to make sure that our presentations and our webinars that we're providing for you are as appropriate as possible. So please, when you close this webinar, you will be sent to a brief webinar evaluation. Takes less than 5 minutes, and it helps us give you the best experience possible. Additionally, the infographic is available, and they're looking for feedback. So I saw that many of you within the first mentee put in some feedback in there. If you can pop over to that link, which should be going into the chat box now, pop over to that link and please give your feedback there, so that we can take that on board as well. If you are requiring any support in your countries or within your programs, please don't hesitate to contact the GNC Technical Alliance, where we can provide some support or direct you to support as well. We are here for you. So thank you everyone for participating, and thank you everyone for all the wonderful presentations, the amazing case studies, to Fatmata for the overview of the BMS procurement, and a really important document, and for the launch of the infographic with Isabel and Linda. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon.
Yeah.